Rock and roll. Look at that. I'll tell you, that's phenomenal. It's our last one of the week, guys. As we all know, Friday is kind of a travel day. But I was just noticing, Jared, what do you think of the shirts that John and I got? Do we look like two guys in somewhere in Margaritaville or what? Yeah, not Fantastic Futures, present.
That's fantastic present. Welcome back to the Rebel's Edge, folks. He is Pete Najarian. Jared is in the ether somewhere, putting up the Bulls, Bears, all the messages you see coming down the side, the timers, all of that stuff. And in just moments, mere moments, bringing you fantastic futures. So with all of that said, let's dive into the macro minute, Pete.
Yep.
Q3 advanced GDP, better than expected. That is good because the gross domestic product of goods and services here in the U.S., that's good. Bad because the Fed is all the more convinced that it needs to stay higher for longer, Pete.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they do, John. Also, how about this one? I mean, when you look at the consumer spending right now, it's just kind of staggering because everything we hear is, wow, we've got this and we've got that. We've maybe brought inflation down a little bit, but, it's still there. And yet we're seeing the spending going crazy. We see the buying of new homes still off the charts. So there's a lot of conflict going on right now, a lot like what we're seeing in the market itself. There's some positives, but there's definitely some big negatives right now.
Yeah, and I think both will continue, Pete.
Yeah.
Positives in various drug companies that we'll talk about over the next several weeks. Negatives from a lot of the people that are being impacted by the higher rates, not just consumers, businesses that need to borrow and so forth. But let's dive into fantastic futures.
Fantastic futures.
That's right. And I'm going to say, Pete, that this is one more reason the Fed's got to stay higher for longer. And that is Ford has agreed to a 25% wage hike in their tentative deal to end the UAW strike. Mm-hmm. Now, while that's good because people want to buy new cars instead of just used cars from Ford, cars and trucks, it is yet one another thing about inflation that just isn't going away, Pete. Everybody wants to be paid more. Not saying they shouldn't, just saying that's part of inflation.
Yeah, absolutely. My fantastic future is going to be this, John. How about coffee prices? Now it's something we look at wheat, we look at corn, we look at coffee, we look at all these different things, nat gas, you name it. But coffee's pretty interesting. I mean, you go back to October, we were somewhere at 145. Now here we are at 169. Shoot, back in April, we were over 200. So there's just a lot movement there, and we've got volatility there as well. I just thought it was interesting just to see the levels at which we've just spiked or percolated in just the last couple of weeks.
Certainly have percolated a lot in the last few weeks.
I knew you'd like that.
Yeah, I do. I like that. Let's talk now for a sec, Pete, about what's going on with Meta, because Meta came out with earnings last night, and the stock was initially higher because the earnings were great. And then they started offering some insights that were not exactly so great. So it was their most profitable quarter in years, beat expectations, 23% year over year jump in revenue. That has to be positive. But the stock quickly flipped and turned to the downside, Pete. And it's the cost cutting and the big jump in revenue weren't enough to have people stick with it after Zuckerberg cut virtually everything going forward.
Yeah, it was an amazing quarter for them, John, as you just mentioned. I mean, when your costs for the metaverse go up too, that's also an issue. So they had a lot of great things going on, some maybe one or two bad things. But I think the reality is, I think there was one of the folks in the C-suite, was the CIO, CFO, somebody had some commentary that definitely was pulling down on the stock. Now, the one thing that I think needs to be pointed out is this is a stock that actually started off the year at 130. We were over 300. So this is a stock that He had made a pretty amazing move to the upside for a lot of the right reasons. And you would have thought this would have actually gotten a little stickier up there when we had that big move. But some of the conversation about what's going on behind the scenes from a macro perspective, certainly something that scared folks. And they were talking about Israel. They were talking about a lot of different things. And I think that helped pull the stock down as well. But John, when you look at Meta now and you see an 18 PE for Meta, and you see what their cash flow is, the cash flow is only $26 billion. And then when you see the cash versus the debt at a positive $25 billion, there's a lot of reasons to keep a very close eye on this one because, of course, the macro is a big deal. But when you look at the levels of where we've fallen back to right now for Meta, it starts to get pretty interesting, I think, in a hurry.
It has, to me as well, Pete. Mm-hmm. And so I'd point out, folks, that Zuckerberg lost about $3.5 billion, or at least that's what he spent. $3.5 billion. I don't know that it's all lost, right, but that's how much he spent on Reality Labs, which is sort of his metaverse, as Pete said. That's the pet project he's got going on there. I remember, Pete, there were some quarters where he had lost $8 billion and $10 billion. So he's really cut the spend over there, but he hasn't eliminated it. And it hasn't borne any real fruit for him yet either. So you have to wonder how long he's going to be patient, because without that, their blast would have been even bigger, Pete, without that $3.7 billion boondoggle known as Reality Labs. All right. What about this one, Pete? Hasbro. Hasbro down 10%. They reported Q3 earnings that were right in line. Revenue missed, however, so that's the top line. And then they cut 2023 outlook, and Mattel was going right down with them, Pete.
Yeah, and everybody would have thought, hey, Mattel, they're going to absolutely blow it out of the water. How about Barbie? How about this and that? The problem is Barbie was great. Everything else, not so great. And when I go back real quick to Hasbro, John, the problem, too, is that outlook. I mean, first of all, the revenue was down 10%. That's not good. And they had a lot of different issues in different product lines and so forth. But it's interesting to see when they put out their outlook as well, they were down a little bit. They had declines of 13 to 15% on the revenue. Whenever you and I talk about guidance, that is the most important thing. I mean, of course, the quarter itself is great oftentimes, but it's really much more about, all right, this is the past. Here's where we're going, and where they're going is down. And that's why those stocks are getting pounded today.
Right. Well, one of the things that we need to do more often, Pete, is remind people that we do have sponsors, like Aries, for instance. And Aries was good enough to give us a little bit of some background on what they do and so forth. And I was going to run it at the top of the show. Well, of course, I rolled right over that. But if we have it, do we have it queued up? There it is.
All right.
Okay, so Aries is this really cool trading platform. It's created by a friend of mine, Retta, and his team. And these guys are crackerjack at this, Pete. So when you look at it, it's both, for your iPhone, for your Android, as well as desktops and so forth. And they've been growing like a weed. That is Aries Trading. I think you'll find some pretty interesting things if you follow some of the links and check out some of that that's running on the screen right now. We'll be joining them tonight at 5:00 for a Spaces, Pete, talking about what that platform does. And I think the founder himself, Retta, is going to be on that Spaces. That's, of course, on letter X, like Twitter. It used to be called Twitter Spaces. Now it's called X Spaces.
Everything.
So make sure you tune in for that. Again, 5:00 Eastern time, a little under 4 hours from right now. All right, Pete, let's hit what's going on with Endeavor, because this is Ari Emanuel. He is, of course, the guy that, Entourage is all about, Pete. Silver Lake is thinking about taking Endeavor private. Now, they already own a big chunk. This is the parent company of the UFC, but they do so many other things. It's really hard to define them as just, it's wrestling with WWE. It's Ultimate Fighting with UFC and so forth, so many other things. But I guess Silver Lake's thinking about taking them private, and that's why the stock has just zoomed to the upside today.
Yeah, there's so many different streams that they've got, John, to your point. And they had IMG. I mean, they've just been about in everything, it seems like. Really interesting company and how they've developed themselves. In Silver Lake, they already had 71% of the voting shares, John. Now they said, what the heck with that? Let's just take the whole daggone thing. So the stock pops about 20% or so early on. Tell you what, I find this one to be very, very intriguing. And here's why. This is why it's always dangerous to have those shorts in there, right? And you look at the shorts, I show that at least from a float perspective, about 13, 14%, something like that. You think those guys are feeling a little bit of a squeeze today on a day where the market's getting crushed? We've got the NASDAQ getting sold off. We've got the Dow getting sold off. We've got some of this Fed talk and everything else. And this stock's up 20 some odd percent. I would say that those shorts are not feeling so great today, those that were shorting this company, because it's having a heck of a day. And if this thing actually closes, those guys are in trouble.
Yeah. And a lot of them there's going to be a lot of forced covering here too, folks, because, when you basically are putting in an offer for a company, people start tendering their shares. They can't tender borrowed shares. So they have to pull those back, and then they tender those shares. So there's a lot of, it's not knocking on the door, but there's certainly a lot of calls being made, Pete, to these guys, not just margin calls, but calls saying, bring the stock back now. So that's going to be pretty ugly. All right. Speaking of ugly, if you have crooked teeth, well, then, of course, some place that'll straighten those teeth out with like an Invisalign, invisible plastic thing that you put in your mouth, and it helps bend your teeth back into correct formation. Well, that company had a number of other, like Smile Direct Club, had competitors. And so you'd think with those competitors circling the drain, they might be doing okay. But guess what, Pete? They missed on top line and bottom line, and then they cut the full year outlook. So this one's down hard, down as much as Endeavor is up.
Significant miss on the earnings, significant miss, as you mentioned, John, on the revenue. So you're right. And then you cut the full year of 23. Things don't look so great going out to 24. You've got lower demand. Now, what does that really mean? As you were saying, a lot of the competitors are kind of falling off to the wayside. Here's one of the problems, though. Invisalign is not cheap. As a matter of fact, I know it all too well because I actually went through that process, long ago, football wise. I got teeth hit around a little bit here and there. I wanted to get them all straightened out, and I did. But I got to tell you something. Because of the cost, are people willing to make that cost something that they want to afford? And clearly, by what they're telling us, the demand is not there. So that's a significant problem that they've got right there. And this stock is a heck of a lot closer to 52-week lows than those 52-week highs that it had sprinted up to. So I think it's something to keep an eye on. I don't think it's now. I don't think you need to buy it. I think we have to wait and see, when will the customers return? When will they be comfortable enough and that demand starts to come back? And then I think if you want to be involved in this one, you can. But right now, I would stay away from it.
Yeah, I'm thinking, Pete, it's got a lot of room to the downside. Yeah. And to your point, even though we'd all like to be healthier, straight teeth aren't necessarily something that's health related. It's looks related. And a lot of people, if they really need it, I guess will spend, but a lot of other people will put off that cost, especially if they're financing it, Pete, because the rates just keep going like this. Yeah. All right. I thought you guys would get a kick out of this, and I wanted to get Pete's reaction to it and Jared's as well. These are some NFL facts laid down by a pretty interesting character. So listen to this, and then we'll talk about it.
NFL facts that sound fake, but god damn it, they're real. Peyton and Eli Manning have an identical career postseason passer rating of 87.4. Tom Brady never threw a touchdown in the first quarter of any of his Super Bowls with the Patriots. And it wasn't until their 8th appearance that they even kicked the field goal. Butt fumbling ass Mark Sanchez has a higher career passer rating than Tom Brady, Steve Young, Troy Aikman, Brett Favre, Big Ben, and the Manning cast. My son is more than just a pretty face. Julian Edelman took Jerry Rice's daughter to prom. I wish they made it work. That baby would be route running out of the womb. The Jets just beat the Eagles for the first time in franchise history since 1973. Brett Favre's first NFL completion was to himself for -7 yards. All of Eli Manning's career postseason wins came in the 2 seasons that he won the Super Bowl. My boy is all or nothing. In terms of yards, the 2010 Chargers had the #1 offense and defense in the league and still missed the playoffs. Larry Fitzgerald has more career tackles than drops. And finally, only 2 players in NFL history have receiving yards over the age of 40. Tom Brady with 6 and Jerry Rice with 2,169.
How about that one, Pete?
I don't know how that's. Are those all factual? I mean,
Are factual.
Larry Fitzgerald has more tackles than drops? Really?
He doesn't drop it. If it hits those hands, Pete, it's in.
That's amazing. I played football, little story that goes along with that, against Larry Fitzgerald's father back in high school. So that gives you, there's a tie-in right there. I mean, unbelievable. His father looks a little bit different than Larry. His dad was more of an offensive lineman, if you know what I mean, than he was any kind of a receiver, but a good guy nonetheless. He was a huge fan of the Popeyes that our 2 brothers used to own on Lake Street back there in Minnesota back in the day. So kind of fun. John, how about this going into the weekend? And it's not necessarily Thursday night games. I'm talking about the actual weekend. College football. What are the best games to watch this weekend? Again, it's going to go right to the Pac-12. Why is that? It's the best conference in all of football this year, and they're going to get disassembled in the not too distant future as far as football is related, and sports. But I'll tell you what, how about Georgia going out there and having this game against Florida? And Florida right now looks really good. The quarterback has been efficient. They've done a lot of things right, but they do have 2 losses. So this is the time that you have to get a win, right? And they're going up against the Georgia team without the tight end Bowers and without a myriad of other players that are either hurt or sick or something. They've got 5 players confirmed out. They've got 6 that are questionable for Georgia. If Florida's got a shot, this is it. And we'll have to see. I think it makes it a much more interesting game. Otherwise, I think Georgia runs them right off the field, John. But without the tight end and without a myriad of other players, they might have a shot. And Florida has a lot of talent this year. So I think that is one game that I think would be a lot of fun. And how about this one? And what do you like in either of these games? I've got Oregon number 8 against Utah number 13. Both have 1 loss. If you end up with 2 losses, it's going to be really, really difficult to get yourself into position to get into those playoffs. We all know that. So what do you think about that game, and who do you think has it? After watching the way Utah has USC's number, it makes it that much more interesting. But this ain't USC. This is an Oregon team that actually does play defense, and they've got a quarterback who might be one of the best in the nation. I think might be the best pro-ready quarterback in football. But what do you think about those games, John? Do you like that the Pac-12 game the best, or what are you thinking?
I do, Pete, because of Bo Nix. So there's a lot of defensive players on Utah that the pros are going to be watching closely. Not that they don't have great offense too, but a lot of defensive players like the guys that shut down USC and Caleb Williams. But Bo Nix, like you say, he's pro-ready, I think, Pete. I mean, I really believe that the way the kid throws, the way he doesn't throw picks, he's very smart the way he runs that offense. And it's a high-powered offense. Yeah. A game that I thought you might have thrown out there to me, Pete, was Oklahoma at Kansas. Yeah. So Oklahoma, like you said, they started out and people didn't really believe, and now they're fully bought in. And they're up to like number 6 on at least one of the polls that I was looking at. But if they go in there and just run roughshod on Kansas, Pete, at Kansas, I think that's a statement game for them because both Kansas teams are really tough. And neither one is an easy mark at home because they really have great fan support at home. Both K-State and Kansas. So that's why I think this could be a statement game if Oklahoma comes out here and rolls them, Pete, which is what I'm predicting right now. I think that's really a statement game for the playoffs.
Yeah, I like it. I think you're exactly right. Kansas is a heck of a football team this year. They have great support, like you were saying. Kansas State, same thing. I don't know that they're at the same level as Oklahoma, but I think they're damn close, and they've done a lot of things offensively, especially at quarterback, where they've done a lot of things right. They've just had a few times where they haven't had everybody, and they've had guys out, and that I think has hurt them this year a little bit here and there. But if they are fully ready and everybody's healthy, that game could get really, really interesting. But we'll see if Oklahoma wants to make it a statement game. That should be fun. Who are the surprise teams this year in the NFL, John? We just finished college football. We're going to roll right into the NFL. I've got some ideas. How about Baltimore? Now, coming into this year, nobody's talking about the Ravens. You know what they're talking about? Well, they're basically, they were focused on Buffalo. Everybody's looking at Kansas City. You know, there's a lot of AFC teams specifically that people are saying, well, it's this team, it's that team, it's this team, it's that team. I'll tell you what, I've been watching a little bit more and more about what's going on with Baltimore. They've got an explosive offense. We know Lamar Jackson is just unbelievable. He leads the team in rushing. Obviously, he's a quarterback, so he continues to throw the ball as well. And their defense, that is a lockdown defense. They're the number one defense in football in terms of points allowed. They're under 14 points a game in a game where there's every single rule in favor of the offense. And meanwhile, these guys are holding people to 14 points or actually less than 14 points. So I think that's one of the teams. And the other one that really does kind of stand out, and I don't know where we were sort of figuring they might be at the beginning of the year, but Miami and the step that the quarterback is making and what they're doing as a team and how they're scoring, how they're doing things. John, they're averaging 34 points a game and 426 yards per game. Now, they've taken advantage of all those abilities that the rules allow in terms of they've got speed everywhere. They've got some great running backs. They do a great job. They got a coach who looks like he's a biology professor at freaking, I don't know, Berkeley or something like that. But the guy, he manages to do things right, and he puts them in a great position. And offensively, they're unbelievable. Defensively, they've got a few holes in there, but offensively, I think this is a team that really is unbelievably explosive. Should be a lot of fun. Who do you have anybody that you're looking at right now that you think is shocking as well, as far as either good or bad? Because quite frankly, there's some shockers. Buffalo Bills might be one of them, where you look at them and you go, what happened to these guys? They're just not at the level they were.
Yeah, well, I loved, Pete, that your buddy and mine, Aaron Rodgers, was telling Pat McAfee how much he's a fan of Lamar Jackson and how much he saw that kid play as a college player and said he's going to be a great pro. One of the guys, Pete, that I work out with here in Puerto Rico tells me all the time that there's this former defensive coordinator from Kansas City that he asked him, he said, how do you know somebody's great when you first see him? And he said, you can tell right away if somebody's great. He said, how about somebody that's going to fall apart? And he says, you don't know till the second year. And you know why that is, Pete? This is an interesting observation by this defense former. It's not Spagnuolo, not the present, but former D coordinator. And he said, you need 2 years to see if somebody's a bust or not. He said, because everybody comes into the league the best player on their team from the team they were coming from. He said, so if you're coming in as a linebacker out of Georgia, a D tackle out of Georgia or Clemson or wherever, he said, you were the best D tackle on that team. Now you're in the NFL, baby. And he said, there are 31 other guys that are at least as good as you, if not better. And that's just on your side, D tackle, and there's 2 of them on the line. So, you know, there might be 62 of them that are at least as good or better than you. So he said, it's how you come in the second year. Did you come in with that chip back on your shoulder, ready to just beat everybody up and take over? Or do you kind of fall back and say, you know, I'm not as good as I thought I was. I thought I was a world beater, and it turns out I'm just good. And I was the best guy on my team, but maybe my team was just good, not great. So we've all seen that, Pete. There are a few guys that come out, and Lamar Jackson's one of them, Pete, that comes out and everybody says, oh, yeah, that kid's got it. And there are other guys, that clip that we just played of, NFL, of facts of the NFL, where that guy said, do you know Sanchez? That's a USC quarterback, Pete. You and I were making fun of him yesterday. Do you know Sanchez has a QBR rating better than all of these stud quarterbacks? Because QBR rating really doesn't mean that much.
I was going to say, that's where I was going.
Yeah. But, I think that there's a lot of these players that can't get up, can't answer the bell. And Sanchez, sadly, is one of them. Couldn't answer the bell. But there's some players like, Carter, that D tackle out of Georgia, Pete, that you're just going, oh my God, I don't think anybody can handle this guy. And nobody has. Right. And, while he's been in the league. So the greats, like that. If somebody's a bust, you don't know till the second year. And I thought that was an interesting observation.
Yeah, I like that one. I think that's true. I think you got to be fair to everybody. And by the way, when you get picked in the very top 5 picks or whatever it might be, John, you and I both know this, but for anybody who doesn't really keep track, you've gone to the 5 worst teams. So you're going somewhere and they're there because they need to get improvement. So that's how the NFL works. Try to get parity as much as they can. And they've done a very good job with this over the years. Of course, there are trades that happen and everything else, but generally the first pick is to the worst team in the NFL. Last thing I would say on the topic of teams that surprised me, I didn't realize how good Cleveland's defense was going to be, John, and you brought it up too. Myles Garrett, but it's not just Myles Garrett. When you look at that defense, what they're able to do, their corners, their safeties, their linebackers, their defensive line, they're good everywhere. And that team is going to be very interesting for people to see if they can get to the playoff. The problem that they have offensively is they've had some injuries. They've had some quarterback issues. They've had to move people around a lot and that type of thing. But outside of that, you look at that team from a defensive perspective, they can shut down just about anybody. And it's a fun team to watch. We saw what they do with the 49ers. They did a heck of a job. That was when the 49ers were actually mostly at full health too. Some of the injuries happened during that game, but it was one of those things where it really is impressive to see how much defense can still be played in today's NFL.
And Pete, just a final note before we go into the weekend, more or less, because we're real close to it. When you see the Jets performing at the level that a couple times, including that win over the Eagles, that they've performed at, can you imagine if indeed Aaron Rodgers can come back this year, Pete? Which he keeps saying he's ready. He's going to be coming back after the bye week. Are you buying into that?
I'll tell you what, it makes them an interesting competitor, doesn't it? Pretty quick. And with the parity that we've got in the league for the most part this year, yes, I realize there's some 1-loss, 2-loss teams or whatever, but fairly parity is starting to get within the NFL, just like it's getting closer and closer to college football, I think, as well. It's interesting because if they can sneak in and Aaron Rodgers is able to actually get back out on the field, I don't know what he's going to be smoking to get himself there, but whatever it is, it ought to be pretty fun. And they ought to start wondering about it if they ought to share that with the rest of the league, because that's amazing. If that happens at his age, to be able to come back from Achilles and all the rest of it, that would be an amazing thing. And he keeps talking about it. So I'm not going to say he's not going to happen, John. I think it's maybe a possibility.
Pete, also a guy that, thank God, we didn't have to play against to earn a spot, but Myles Garrett, as you said, have you seen him that he has lined up as middle linebacker at times?
It shows you how athletic he is, right?
Oh my God, when he jumped over everybody to block that field goal attempt too. You can't jump on people. We all know that. But if you clear them, if you jump over them, and that guy did, Pete. So that might be one of the most talented athletes in the NFL, period.
And he quotes poetry constantly, John. The guy is a really different bird, and he's a great guy, and a lot of people really like him. I'm one of them. He's a special player in the NFL.
He is. Well, thanks for joining us, folks. He's Pete Najarian. I'm John Najarian. Jared, thank you for another great week, sir. We'll be back Monday next week, folks, with another Rebels Edge, 1 p.m. Eastern Time.